The rain hadn't stopped for 2 days. It came down in sheets, a relentless wall of water that turned the mountain valley into a churning sea of mud and broken branches. The river, once a gentle ribbon cutting through the land, had become a violent monster, swollen and snarling, dragging with it everything it touched: trees, fence posts, even livestock. Jack crouched by the window of his cabin, a tin mug of cold coffee clutched in his calloused hands. He watched the gray sky fold into itself, thunder booming like distant cannon fire. The silence inside the cabin was thick, broken only by the occasional pop of wet wood in the fireplace. His eyes, faded blue and rimmed with exhaustion, stayed fixed on the distant creek that sliced through the edge of his property. He hadn't spoken to another human in months, maybe more. Not since he'd given up the ranch, sold off the cattle, and let the barn rot under its own weight. What remained was this shell, a man turned to stone by time and grief. When the whinny came, sharp and desperate, it cut through the storm like a knife. Jack's body moved before his mind caught up. The mug dropped, shattering on the wooden floor. He shoved open the cabin door and stepped into the rain, the wind slapping his coat like an old enemy. The sound came again, high-pitched, terrified. A horse. He grabbed the coiled rope hanging by the porch and jogged toward the sound, boots sinking into the muddy earth with every step. He hadn't run in years. His breath came hard, his knees protesting with every stride. But something in that cry, something raw and familiar, pulled him forward. The creek had overflown its banks, now a fast-moving river of debris. Jack stopped at the edge, squinting through the rain. And there it was, a young Mustang, no more than 3 years old, chestnut coat soaked and slick against its frame, was trapped midstream. Its front legs were braced against a cluster of rocks, but the rest of its body fought the current. Foam flecked its mouth. Panic bled from its eyes. A strand of barbed wire twisted around one of its hind legs, anchoring it in place. Jack cursed under his breath. The current was too fast. It could pull him under in seconds. But he didn't hesitate. He tied one end of the rope around a boulder on the bank, looped the rest around his waist, and stepped into the icy water. The cold stole his breath instantly. He staggered forward, leaning into the force, eyes locked on the horse. The animal saw him now, flaring its nostrils, muscles tensing. He moved slow, deliberate, whispering as he went, though the storm would carry his words away. "You're all right," he said softly. "You're not alone." His fingers found the wire, slick with mud and blood. He worked it free, ignoring the gash it opened on his palm. The horse kicked once, then stilled, trembling. Jack braced himself and gave a sharp tug. The wire snapped loose. The horse reared slightly, then collapsed sideways into the current. Jack wrapped an arm around its neck, using every bit of strength to pull them both toward the bank. It took minutes, or years. Time melted under the weight of rain and fear. But when they finally reached the shore, Jack collapsed beside the animal, both of them soaked, breathing hard, eyes wide with exhaustion. The Mustang didn't bolt. It lay there, chest heaving, as Jack rested his head against the wet earth. He turned his face to the sky, letting the rain wash over him. For a moment, all the noise faded, the storm, the river, the pain in his chest that never really left. He sat up slowly and looked at the horse. It stared back at him, eyes still wide, but calmer now. Jack reached out a tentative hand. The horse flinched, then allowed the touch. "You're a lucky one," he murmured. "Or maybe just stubborn." His eyes drifted back to the river, now full of broken pieces, branches, twisted metal, the remnants of fences. But no other horses. No herd. Just this one, saved by chance or fate. The horse struggled to stand. Jack helped, using his shoulder as leverage. The animal rose shakily, water streaming from its coat, ears flicking toward the trees. Jack expected it to run. That would have been natural. But instead, it turned toward him and waited. He didn't know what that meant. With a nod, Jack took the rope and made a gentle loop around its neck, not tight, not binding, just enough to guide. "Come on," he said. "Let's get out of this mess." They walked slowly back toward the cabin, two survivors limping through the rain. Inside, Jack toweled the horse as best he could with an old wool blanket. The creature stood quietly, flinching only when he touched the raw wound where the wire had cut deep. Jack cleaned it with antiseptic from a rusted first-aid kit, the same one he hadn't opened since. He shook the thought away. When he looked into the horse's eyes again, he saw something more than fear. There was recognition, maybe trust, or maybe he was just imagining it, clinging to something human in a world that had left him behind. He opened the door to the small shed behind the cabin and led the horse inside. It was dusty and used, but dry. He laid down fresh hay and stood watching as the animal sniffed cautiously, then settled in. "Don't get too comfortable," he muttered. "You'll be gone by morning, I reckon." But even as he said it, he didn't believe it. That night, as the storm finally began to break, Jack sat on the porch, listening to the soft snort and shuffle from the shed. He couldn't remember the last time he wasn't alone. Far off in the distance, deep beyond the trees, something moved. Jack stood, scanning the dark. It could have been the wind, could have been nothing. But if he'd looked closer, through the curtain of mist and moonlight, he might have seen them. The silhouettes of wild horses, watching, waiting, silent. Jack awoke to a strange sound, breathing, steady and close. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming, caught in the remnants of a memory that felt too warm to be real. But when he opened his eyes and turned his head toward the shed window, he saw her, the horse. She stood there, framed in the morning light, her coat still damp, sides rising and falling with a quiet rhythm. Her gaze wasn't fearful. It was searching. He sat up slowly, his back aching from the cold night air and the strain of the rescue. The storm had passed. The valley, though heavy with mud and debris, had survived. But something had shifted, not just in the land, but in him. Jack stepped into the shed with slow, careful movements, a bowl of warm oats in his hands. The horse lifted her head, but didn't shy away. He placed the bowl near her hooves and waited. She sniffed the food, then began to eat. "You've got some fire in you," he said softly. "Storm like that would have broken most." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It felt like a conversation, one made without words. He found himself watching her closely, the way her ears flicked, how her eyes tracked his every motion. She wasn't wild anymore. Not fully. Something had changed between them. He cleaned her wound again, more thoroughly this time, noticing how the barbed wire had sliced deeper than he first thought. She flinched when he pressed the cloth against it, but she didn't bolt, not even when he applied the ointment or wrapped the gauze. Later, he stood by the fence behind the shed, gazing out across the soaked valley. Trees leaned, roots exposed. Patches of earth had caved in. But what held his attention was the absence. The other horses gone. No hoof prints, no distant calls. It was as if they'd vanished into mist. He thought about that night, how he'd glimpsed movement among the trees. Shapes. Watching. He hadn't spoken it aloud, not even to himself. But deep down, something told him that saving her hadn't gone unnoticed. He fed her again at noon and again at dusk. When the sky blushed with the last light of day, he found her standing by the cabin door, waiting. Not pawing, not pacing, just waiting. Like she belonged there. Like she had nowhere else to be. He let her in. She stood in the center of the small living room, looking around at the dust-covered furniture and old photographs on the mantel. Jack followed her gaze to one in particular, a picture of a young girl, no more than 12, arms wrapped around a black mare, both of them laughing at something beyond the frame. Hope. The name came unbidden, rising from a locked place inside his chest. His daughter had loved horses, loved them with a fierceness that made her eyes glow. She'd begged him to save her mare the night the first flood came, but he hadn't been fast enough. The horse drowned. So did the girl. He tried to carry them both. He only made it halfway. His hand trembled as he turned the photograph face down. "I'm not who you think I am," he said to the horse. "I don't save things. I lose them." But she didn't flinch. She lowered her head, pressing her soft muzzle against his chest. He didn't move, didn't breathe. Something in him cracked. A quiet, painful release he hadn't felt in years. He decided then to give her a name. "River," he whispered, "because that's where you nearly died. And maybe where I start again." River blinked slowly, her breath warm against his skin. He led her back to the shed that night, made the bed softer with old blankets, and sat with her until sleep took them both. The following days settled into rhythm. Jack repaired the broken fence posts with stiff fingers and rewrapped River's leg each morning. She limped less with every passing day. He found himself humming again while chopping firewood, caught off guard by the sound of his own voice. She followed him everywhere now, not out of fear, but choice. At night, she stood just outside the cabin, close enough that he could hear her movements. She became his shadow, his comfort, his living memory. But something still nagged at the edges of Jack's mind. Tracks. They appeared on the edge of his property 2 mornings in a row. Hoof prints, fresh and clustered, but not River's. Jack followed them once, far enough to see where they circled the clearing and vanished into the woods again. No sign of broken branches. No sound. Just prints that seemed deliberate, like someone, or something, had walked to the edge, then turned away. He mentioned it aloud, while brushing River's coat near the porch. "You've got company. That your family checking in." She flicked her ears, glancing toward the trees. Her body tensed for a moment, then relaxed. It didn't feel like coincidence. That night, Jack stood outside longer than usual, listening. The wind moved through the leaves like whispers. He squinted toward the dark forest, hoping for movement, for something that made sense. River stepped beside him, her body warm and calm. They stood together in silence. A part of him wanted to believe the other Mustangs had forgotten her, that they'd moved on, that she'd been abandoned, like he had been. But he didn't believe that. Not when the hoof prints returned again the next day. And especially not when he found River standing at the edge of the tree line, just before dawn, ears pointed toward the woods. She didn't move. She didn't call. She waited. And far beyond her, hidden in mist and shadow, asterisk asterisk, something watched back asterisk asterisk. The next morning, Jack found River already at the fence line, her eyes fixed on the distant woods. She hadn't eaten. Her body was still alert. The wound on her leg had begun to heal. No limp now, but her focus had shifted. There was a quiet tension in her posture, like she was listening for something only she could hear. Jack poured oats into the trough, but she didn't move. He called her name softly, expecting the usual flick of the ears, the slow trot forward. Nothing, just that fixed gaze. He turned his eyes toward the tree line. It looked the same as always, dense, quiet, unmoving. But he no longer trusted appearances. He walked to her, laying a hand gently on her neck. "You're waiting for them, aren't you?" Her muscles twitched under his palm. "They saw what I did, and now they don't know what to make of me." She blinked slowly, then stepped forward, not toward the oats, but toward the trees. Jack didn't follow. Not yet. Instead, he returned to the porch, sat on the creaking chair, and watched her from a distance. The sky had turned pale with morning, clouds breaking enough to let warm sunlight coat the valley. River stood at the edge of the forest for nearly an hour before turning back. She ate then, slowly, distracted, but ate. That evening, the tracks returned. But this time they were closer. Jack found them looping behind the shed, near the well. Hoof prints, 4, 5, maybe more. All different sizes. They hadn't been there the day before. They hadn't come by accident. He walked the perimeter with a lantern in hand, River trailing behind him. The air smelled like pine and damp earth. Every time he paused, she stopped beside him, her ears flicking, nostrils flaring. At one point, she let out a low nicker. It wasn't fearful. It sounded like a signal. Jack turned to her. "They're not afraid of me, are they? Just cautious." He sighed. "I would be too." The next 2 days passed in quiet suspense. The forest seemed alive with unseen presence. At night, Jack heard distant hoofbeats, soft, measured, never frantic. River grew more alert, but never anxious. It felt coordinated, intentional. Then, on the 3rd day, they appeared. It happened in the early hours, just after sunrise. Jack had stepped out with his coffee, expecting the same silence that had blanketed the mornings before. But this time he froze. Just beyond the fence, not 20 yards from the cabin, stood the herd. 9 wild mustangs. They didn't stampede, didn't flee. They stood in a loose arc, their eyes fixed on Jack and River. The lead horse, A tall black stallion with a jagged scar across his shoulder took a step forward. Jack's grip on his mug tightened. River didn't hesitate. She trotted forward, slipping through the open gate and stopping just in front of the stallion. The two touched noses, a long, silent greeting. Then, one by one, the others approached her, sniffing, circling, recognizing. It wasn't chaos. It was ceremony. Jack stood frozen. It felt like watching something sacred. The black stallion lifted his head and looked directly at Jack. Not at his feet. Not at his hands. At him. The look wasn't wild. It wasn't feral. It was deliberate, questioning, aware. Jack's breath caught in his chest. He didn't move. Just nodded once. The stallion blinked, then turned. The rest followed, River included. "No," Jack whispered. He stepped forward, his voice louder this time. "River." She stopped, turned her head slightly, as if torn. Jack reached the fence and rested his hand on the post. "You don't have to go." The black stallion turned too, watching, assessing. River took a step back toward Jack. The herd shifted uncertainly. Then she took another. And another. She returned. Jack opened the gate. She stepped through and nuzzled his shoulder as she passed, brushing against him like a breeze. He stood there, stunned, as the rest of the herd watched. Then, something unexpected happened. One by one, the Mustangs approached the fence, not aggressively, not nervously, but with quiet purpose. The stallion came last, stopping inches from the gate. He lowered his head and let out a deep, vibrating breath. Jack's heart pounded. He didn't know what to do. So he spoke. "I didn't take her," he said. "I just helped her stand again." The stallion exhaled, slow and calm. Then, without a sound, he turned and led the herd away, disappearing into the mist that still clung to the trees. River remained. That night, Jack couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch with a blanket draped over his shoulders, River lying nearby in the grass. The sky was scattered with stars, the air sharp and clean. He thought about how long he'd lived with silence, how grief had become a weight he carried like a stone in his chest. But in just a few days, this horse had stirred something long buried. Compassion, trust, the courage to look outward again. He rose and walked to the barn, empty for years, dust coating every surface. With a slow, deliberate motion, he opened the wide double doors. The smell of old hay and pine wood rose up to meet him. He coughed and smiled bitterly. He would clean it, patch the roof, fix the stalls. For her, and maybe for others. The next morning, River stood at the gate again. But this time, she wasn't alone. 3 Mustangs waited beside her. They weren't frantic. They weren't trying to reclaim her. They stood calmly, watching Jack work as he hammered new boards into the barn siding. River paced slowly near the gate, glancing between the others and the open field. By afternoon, the Mustangs were grazing at the edge of the property. River stayed close to the cabin. That evening, Jack set out 5 buckets of water and a bale of fresh hay, just in case. And when he woke the next morning, they were still there. The days that followed settled into a rhythm Jack hadn't known he needed. Every morning, the herd returned to the valley, sometimes 5 strong, sometimes more than a dozen. They never stayed the night, not all of them, but they came like clockwork, just as the sun cracked open the sky. Jack began preparing for them without thinking. Fresh water, cut hay, oats if he had any to spare. River was the bridge, the silent reason they trusted him. She remained by the cabin each night, choosing closeness over wildness, loyalty over instinct. Jack rebuilt the barn with slow determination. Each nail driven was like breathing life into the past. He cleared the dust, repaired the gates, swept out the old shadows. He even uncovered Hope's old saddle, still hanging where she'd left it. He didn't touch it, just stared at it long enough to feel the ache behind his ribs, then moved on. Word spread, first to the neighboring rancher, then to the store clerk down in town. Wild horses visiting a man who once hadn't spoken to anyone in years. Curious whispers bloomed. One morning, a pickup rolled to a stop at the edge of the dirt road, and a father stepped out, lifting a small boy from the passenger seat. The child was frail, his legs stiff and braces clinking as he moved. They stood silently, watching from a distance. Jack didn't send them away. River was the one who walked to the boy first. She stepped with such gentleness, it looked choreographed. She lowered her head, let the boy reach out with a trembling hand, and touched her muzzle. His face lit with awe. Jack watched, heart caught in his throat, as the boy laughed, a sound so pure and sudden it startled the birds from the trees. The father mouthed thank you, and Jack only nodded, unable to speak. After that, more came. Not in crowds, just quiet souls who needed something wordless. Veterans with canes, mothers with tired eyes, children who had never seen a horse up close. River greeted them all with the same calm grace. And always, the herd lingered nearby, guardians in the trees, unseen but present. Jack started calling the place Hope's Hollow. He carved the name into a wooden board and nailed it above the barn door. Not to forget her, but to honor what she'd left behind. A love too big to die. The old sadness didn't vanish. It never would. But now it lived beside something else. Something lighter. But peace never lasts forever. Not in the real world. One gray morning, a white government truck pulled up the road. Two men stepped out, official, stiff-backed, hats low over their eyes. They introduced themselves as Wildlife Management. Polite but firm. Concerned reports had come in. A herd of wild horses gathering near private land, disrupting grazing territory. Potential risk of overpopulation. Regulations, they said. Relocation, they explained. Jack listened, jaw tight. They're not causing trouble, he said. They're not even staying. The taller man nodded. Maybe not yet. But herds grow. And curiosity turns to concern. Folks will push for control. Jack didn't yell. He didn't beg. He simply said, they remember kindness. That's more than I can say for most people. The men exchanged a glance. Said they'd return in a few weeks. Said they hoped it wouldn't come to anything drastic. Then they left. That night, Jack stood in the open pasture, staring at the horizon. The herd was scattered across the hills, grazing silently under the dusk. River stood at his side. He placed a hand on her neck. They want to take you away, he whispered. But you're free. No one gets to own that. She leaned against him, her breath warm, steady. A promise. The next morning, the sky turned dark too early. Clouds rolled in heavy and fast. Wind lashed the trees, and the river, low for days, began to swell again. Jack felt it before the rain even started. A storm, sharp and angry, coming down from the mountains. He moved fast, securing the barn doors, pulling tools inside, filling troughs. He called out into the wind for the horses. Some had already vanished into the trees. But River remained, standing at the barn entrance, waiting. Jack hesitated, then opened the gate wider. One by one they came. Not just the herd, but others. Horses Jack didn't recognize. Mares, colts, older stallions with scars and slow gaits. Dozens. The storm howled through the valley, but they didn't flee. They followed River's lead. Into the barn. Into shelter. Into his care. He spent the night with them, soaked and shivering, but never alone. He moved from stall to stall, checking hooves, calming nerves, speaking in low tones. River stayed nearest the entrance, unmoving, eyes locked on the storm outside like a sentinel. The wind screamed. Lightning danced across the sky. And somewhere near dawn, River let out a soft whinny. Jack turned and saw her not alone anymore, but with a foal. Tiny, trembling, slick with rain and birth. Jack dropped to his knees, heart thundering. The storm had taken before, but tonight it had given something back. River licked the foal gently, then nudged it toward Jack. He reached out, hand steady, tears rising without shame. Hope, he whispered. That's your name. The storm passed. Morning came like a breath held too long. The valley shimmered under a blanket of mist, but the barn stood firm. Inside, River nuzzled her full. Around them, the herd rested, calm and still. Jack stepped into the light, shoulders straight, eyes clear. He had nothing to prove. No grand speeches to make. He had built something with his hands, mended something with his heart, and in return, the world had offered him a second chance. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing. I bring true, heartfelt stories every day.